At number 10, we have the name of the religion. When it comes to Islam, Islam is an Arabic word meaning submission, and in the religious context, it means submission to the will of God. Islam is derived from an Arabic word literally meaning peace. Now, for Judaism, the word can be broken down as Judaism. The English term Jew or Judah originates in the biblical Hebrew word Yehudi, meaning from the kingdom of Judah, or in a more religious sense, worshiper of one God. Moving on to number 9, their holy book. There's a big difference here. For Judaism, the Hebrew scriptures referred to by the Christians as the Old Testament are called the Tanakh, which is a Hebrew acronym for the 3 different parts. And it's divided up like this. There's the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or the Pentateuch. Then there is the Nevi'im, which are the books of the prophets. And then the Ketuvim, which refers to the writings. When it comes to Islam, the source of all authority in Islam is the Quran. Muslims believe that it is the verbatim word of God, who they refer to as Allah, and God dictated this to Muhammad, the prophet, in the Arabic language. The Quran is divided up now into chapters or surahs, and the Quran contains 114 surahs, and the surahs are further divided into verses called ayahs. Next up, we have other traditions. For Islam, there is the Hadith, which is a collection of traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, and the Hadith actually functions as a supplement to the Quran, giving guidance to Muslims for just daily living. Judaism has the Talmud, which is an oral tradition that explains and interprets the Tanakh. It includes the Mishnah, which is a code of Jewish law. The next difference is a difference in prayer. When it comes to Islam, there are 5 daily obligatory prayers that form the second pillar of Islam, and it's observed 5 times a day at certain prescribed times. And we have the Fajr, which is observed at dawn. The Zuhr prayer is done at noon. Then there's the Asr prayer, which is done in the afternoon. The Maghrib prayer is observed at dusk, and the Isha prayer is observed after sunset. Now, in Judaism, Jews are actually supposed to pray 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. There's also a Jewish prayer book. It is known as the Siddur, and it actually has special services that are set down for this. Praying regularly helps a person get better at building their relationship with their God. There's also a massive difference when it comes to the population of Muslims and Jews. So let's look at Islam first. It's estimated that there's 1.8 billion, or closer to 2 billion by some estimates, Muslims in the world. And when you calculate that, that's more than 24% of the world's total population who identify as Muslim. Islam is the official religion in 26 countries in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. Islam is also growing faster than any other religion in the entire world. And when it comes to Judaism, the world population is a lot smaller. The population of Jews stands at 14.7 million, according to a report by Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics. The world's Jewish population reached a total of 16.6 million, but this was right before the start of World War II back in the year 1939. So the Jewish population has dipped since then. Okay, continuing to number 5, we have Mary. In Islam, Mary, or Maryam, receives a lot of admiration and is a very significant person. She's said by the Prophet Muhammad to be one of the 4 best women that God has ever created. There's even a surah or chapter in the Quran called Maryam, which is dedicated to Mary. Surah Maryam is the 19th chapter of the Quran, and it contains 98 ayahs or verses. And when it comes to Judaism, the belief in Mary actually does not apply to the religion at all. She plays no role in the Jewish tradition or religion other than historically. They would acknowledge that someone named Mary did in fact exist. But while we're looking at the difference in Mary, let's also look at the differences in Jesus. In Judaism, Jesus is not viewed as the Messiah, nor the virgin birth is acknowledged. This is largely due to the belief that Jesus, if he ever existed according to Jewish belief, didn't fulfill the scriptural requirements that the Messiah was supposed to fulfill. And for some Jews, more recently though, they have adopted the belief that Jesus was simply a good Jewish teacher. But in Islam, the belief in Jesus is much different. Islam, though similar to Judaism, does not teach that Jesus was divine or that he died for the sins of the world. However, in Islam, Jesus is identified as the Messiah, as well as his virgin birth is mentioned in the Quran. And Jesus is also regarded as one of the mightiest messengers of God and did many miracles among his people. Number 3 brings us the differences in the Sabbath. When it comes to Islam, the Quran affirms that Jews are supposed to observe the Sabbath, and God, however, ordered Muslims to make every effort to drop all of their business and attend the congregational Friday prayer. Muslims can also then go and continue on their regular activity for the rest of the day, and this is actually referenced in the Quran, Surah 62 verses 9. But in Judaism, the Jewish Sabbath, or Shabbat, from the Hebrew word shavet, which means to rest, is observed throughout the year on the 7th day of each week, Saturday. According to biblical tradition, the Sabbath commemorates the original 7th day on which God rested after creating the earth. Now, the Sabbath is a day of rest for the Jews, and its observance begins on Friday sunset up until Saturday sunset. Number 2 brings us another huge difference. Who was the son that was to be sacrificed? In Judaism, they teach that at some point in Isaac's youth, his father Abraham took him to Mount Moriah, and at God's command, Abraham was to build a sacrificial altar and sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar. But after he tied up his son and the altar was ready, he was ready to draw the knife to kill his son. But at the last moment, there was an angel from God that prevented Abraham from doing so. And instead, he was then directed to sacrifice a nearby ram that was stuck in the bushes. But in Islam, the story goes a bit different. Muslims hold the belief that Abraham was told to sacrifice his son Ismail, also known as Ishmael, although the Quran does not actually mention the name of the son to be sacrificed. And as it goes, as Abraham attempts to slay Ishmael or Ismail, an angel appears to prevent the death, and God tells Abraham that he has fulfilled the command. And finally, we made it to number 1, the biggest difference in this episode when it comes to Judaism and Islam. And this is the status of their religion. So let's look at Judaism first. Jewish people believe that there is only one God who has established a covenant or special agreement with them. And their God communicates to believers through prophets and rewards good deeds while also punishing evil deeds. Most Jews, with the exception of certain groups, believe that their Messiah still has not come yet, but one day he will come. Judaism does not believe that other people must adopt its own religious beliefs and practices in order to be redeemed. They believe that it is by your deeds, not by creed, that you're judged. When it comes to this in Islam, though, the status of their religion, well, the Quran refers to Islam as the religion of Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Jesus, as well as all the other prophets. And it's simply the last of the divine messages to reach humankind through the Prophet Muhammad, who was chosen by God as the bearer of this final revelation. It's an all-encompassing revelation for the entire world, not just for the Muslims. Now, conversion by Muslims to other faiths is actually forbidden under most interpretations of Sharia law, and converts are considered apostates. Now, non-Muslims, however, are allowed to convert into Islam. Starting off at number 10, the first similarity is Abraham. Abraham is an important figure in Islam and Judaism, and these religions are both known as Abrahamic religions. Muslims descended from the prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael, and Abraham and his son Isaac are where the Jewish nation descended from. Islam as an organized religion was founded by the prophet Muhammad in the 7th century AD, and Islam was born in Arabia. Both Jews and Arabs are classified as Semitic people and traditionally viewed as descendants from Shem, who was the son of Noah. These religions are also monotheistic. They share the common belief in the oneness of God, which is monotheism, and Muslims refer to God by the name Allah. The root of the word Allah El is found throughout the Jewish Torah as the name of God as well. And they believe in the existence of one God and only one God, period. So you won't be finding any beliefs like the Trinity or depictions of God in the form of avatars or anything like that in both of these religions. The next thing that they share in common is that they reject the Christian view of Jesus. The Christian faith claims that Jesus Christ is God, but both Jews and Muslims fully reject this claim about Jesus. Other Christian beliefs about Jesus that they reject are also the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus being the literal Son of God, and also him being the Savior of the world. Christianity maintains that Jesus is in some sense a divine incarnation of God, who is the second person of the Trinity consisting of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and hence equal with God. But in Judaism and Islam, each of them see this as a very radical and nonsensical claim, because you simply can't be incarnated into a human being if you're God. God just doesn't operate like that. So from the perspective of both Judaism and Islam, such beliefs about Jesus are seen as anti-monotheistic. Islam and Judaism also share a common belief in the resurrection and the judgment day. So most Jews and Muslims believe in some version of this. The general accepted idea is that there will come a day when God will collectively raise from the dead every single person who has ever lived and then individually pronounce judgment. All who are deemed righteous in God's eyes, they're given a reward, and for those who aren't, they're given a punishment. Now, of course, there are different variations in the understanding and the specific sequence of the resurrection and the judgment, but the core idea is shared in some form between these two religions, and it plays a very important role in the two faiths. Jews and Muslims also believe in angels. Judaism and Islam each teach of heavenly beings generally referred to as angels, and angels are supernatural beings created by God to serve as his messengers and to act out all instructions given to them by God. Both the Tanakh, which is the full Hebrew Bible, and the Talmud, which is the supporting literature, have numerous accounts of stories about angels. Likewise, in the Quran, it talks about angels being God's messengers as well, and the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, and both Judaism and Islam also warn against worshipping any angels. The next similarity is prophets and divine intervention. So Judaism and Islam teach that God communicates directly to humans through prophets or human beings chosen by God through dreams and visions. In Judaism, Moses is often seen as the main prophet since it was through him that God revealed the Torah. The first 5 books of the Bible are collectively referred to as the Torah, if you didn't know, and the second or the middle section of the Hebrew Bible is known as the Nevi'im, meaning the prophets, and it contains accounts of subsequent prophets after Moses. For Islam, Muhammad is the prophet through which God revealed the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad is regarded by Muslims as the last prophet through whom God will speak to humanity. Just like the Jewish scriptures, the Quran recognizes Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, King Solomon, King David, Elijah, as well as many other prophets. There's also quite a lot of similarities with their diet rules. So most people have heard the term kosher in reference to Jews, and that Jews only eat kosher foods. Pork, for example, is not eaten because it's not kosher. Similarly, Muslims are also required to eat only certain kinds of food known as halal foods, and to avoid certain other kinds of foods called haram foods. The term kosher means ritually correct, and this is derived from the Torah. Of course, not all Jews strictly follow these dietary laws. Most Orthodox Jews do, however, eat kosher, whereas many Reformed Jews may be a little bit more lenient in the degree to which they stick to these rules. In Islam, the Quran forbids eating pork, eating food with blood in it, improperly slaughtered animals, and a number of other types of food would be considered haram in Islam. There are some variations in which foods and drinks are allowed in either of these faiths though. So we're coming down to the final 3 similarities between these two religions, and the third one is prayer. So anyone may pray as often and at any time that they want, but in both Judaism and Islam, they share the similarity of a fixed number of set prayers per day. Generally, Muslims have 5 formal prayers a day as part of the 5 pillars of Islam, and Muslims worldwide are required to face the direction of Mecca in Saudi Arabia when conducting these prayers. In Judaism, usually prayers are done 3 times a day, one in the morning, then in the afternoon, and finally in the evening. And sometimes more prayers are added for holy days. Certain branches of Judaism consider daily prayers optional though. They also both see Jerusalem as a holy city. According to the Bible, the capital of Israel today and one of the world's oldest cities, Jerusalem, was originally established by King David about 3,000 years ago. David's son, King Solomon, established the first temple there. And even though the temple was never rebuilt after the destruction in 70 AD, Jerusalem is still held in high regard in Judaism. The Temple Mount with the Wailing Wall sees thousands of visitors who come there and visit for prayer. For Muslims, Jerusalem is also a holy place. It's Islam's 3rd holiest city after Mecca and Medina, and Islam recognizes the previous prophets throughout the history and their connection to Jerusalem as well. Jerusalem also plays a role in the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension, where the angel Gabriel transported the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Jerusalem for prayer, and then from Jerusalem to heaven, where he met some of the previous prophets who ascended. Jerusalem was also the direction that Muslims were instructed to face during their prayers, and of course this was changed to Mecca once the Muslims were divinely instructed to do so. And the final similarity I want to look at is peace. Peace is a very central concept in both of these religions. They both have a similar greeting, meaning peace be upon you. There's Shalom Aleichem, and that's the Hebrew greeting used in Judaism, and the appropriate response would be Alaikum Shalom. And this literally translates to unto you peace. Salam alaikum is the Arabic greeting, and that's used in Islam, and the appropriate response would be wa alaikum salam, meaning the same thing as a Hebrew response, unto you peace. We have the calendar. One of the most interesting similarities between Judaism and Islam is the calendar. In both Islam and Judaism, the calendar is based on the cycles of the moon. The month begins by the sighting of the moon, or calculating when the new moon will be in the sky. The start of the year is called Rosh Hashanah in Judaism, which in Arabic is called Ras Hasana. Then there's Yom Kippur, which corresponds to Ashura in Islam. Following that, there's a famous Jewish holiday, Passover, which corresponds to the Muslim Laylat al-Barat in the month of Shaban. Sarafat ha-Omar in Judaism corresponds to Ramadan in Islam, and Shavuot lines up with Eid al-Fitr, and the 9th of Av happens during the time of the Muslim Hajj. So it's pretty surprising that practically all the major holidays and events in Judaism and Islam correspond. Next up is circumcision. Now this was one I was going to put into part 1, but I didn't know if YouTube was going to flag my video. Like literally I've been flagged for saying the word God, which is crazy, but this time around I'm like, I can't really hold back on the facts, so here it is, right? So both Islam and Judaism, they practice male circumcision. In the Bible, Abraham was commanded to be circumcised, and this would become a symbol of the promise that God made to Abraham as well as his offspring.
What we promote in Islam is male circumcision, because this is regarded not only as the sunnah or practice of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but a practice that goes back all the way to the Prophet Abraham and has been practiced by many prophets since.
So of course the practice continued with Abraham's children. The Torah lays out the instructions that says that newborns should be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. Now science has shown that the 8th day is very important. Why? Because the levels of vitamin K are the highest on that day, and vitamin K plays an important role in stopping bleeding. The command for circumcision isn't in the Quran, however, but the Prophet Muhammad required it for his male followers, which makes sense because Jews and Muslims have pretty much the same history.
We should avoid female circumcision altogether, but male circumcision, this is not known to be harmful. I'm not aware of any study which shows that this is harmful. Jesus himself is said to have been circumcised.
At number 8, we have female head covering. Both Islam and Judaism encourage modesty in your appearance and also promote that women should cover their hair. Now I'm not going to get into the whole ins and outs of of why women's heads have to be covered, but I just want to point out that the similarity exists. The general belief of when and why women should cover their hair does have some differences though in both the religions. Many married Jewish women wear a headscarf to cover their hair. Islam instructs that women wear a headscarf or hijab after puberty. Along with the head covering though, both religions encourage women to dress modestly in general. This includes wearing long and loose fitting clothing. You know, don't want to be showing all your female body parts imprinted out.
There is no source that states directly, in black and white, that a married woman must cover her head. We see it indirectly in the scriptures.
Let's move on. We have the Hadith and the Talmud up next at number 7. The Islamic Hadith and the Jewish Talmud have also been compared because they are both authoritative texts that are outside of the actual scriptures. The Hadith and the Talmud texts were originally passed down through oral tradition for generations before being put in writing. We're taking a look at religious law at number 6. Judaism and Islam are unique in having their own systems of religious law, which is also based on oral tradition. Oftentimes these laws can override the written laws, and also there's no real distinction of them being religious laws only. These laws are often seen as laws, period, not bound by religious affiliation. In Islam, the laws are called Sharia, and in Judaism, they're known as halakha. Both Judaism and Islam consider learning and studying religious law to be a form of worship to God. Now in at number 5, the halfway spot, we have the similarities in the belief in the tailbone. Yeah, I know, right? Like, what am I talking about anyway? So let me get into that. So there's this small bone in the body at the base of the spinal column called the Luz bone, known to some as the coccyx or the cervical vertebra. It's believed that from this bone, the body will be rebuilt at the time of resurrection. Muslims and Jews share the belief that this bone does not decay. Muslims refer to this bone as Abju al-Thanab. Jews believe that people will be resurrected from what they call the Luz in the backbone. Yeah, no, pretty interesting similarity. And number 4, we have homosexuality. So this is another touchy topic that people get super worked up about, so I'll do my best to be as sensitive as possible to people of all beliefs. The sacred texts of both Islam and Judaism ban homosexuality and label it as a sin. Now this has been a much debated point, especially over the past century.
The most liberal Orthodox positions on this are that gay sex is itself a sin, but we're all sinners, and so a person who engages in that is still a Jew and still is welcome within the community.
Depending on who you speak to, homosexuality is viewed as morally wrong, or it's viewed simply as being not as beneficial to humanity as heterosexual relationships, which allow for procreation. Not only that, any form of sexual relations outside of marriage is also forbidden in Judaism and Islam.
What is forbidden in our religion is the action of intimacy outside of marriage. What is not forbidden, the Sharia does not forbid feelings of the heart.
Number 3 brings us the universal religion. So the next similarity, for the most part, is going to be quoted because I think it's said pretty well anyways. So the Jewish rabbi Ben Abrahamson, he says, Judaism believes that there is a basic religion which the whole world must follow. In the Quran, it says there is only one religion which is acceptable before Allah, which is Islam. We believe that there is one faith that's required by all mankind, and we call it the faith of Noah. This is similar to what is written in the Surah Ash-Shura, and it says that he has laid down the same religion for you as he enjoined on Noah, that which we have revealed to you and which we enjoined to Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Establish a religion and do not make divisions in it. You can also find a similar idea in Judaism, that there is one religion that was given to Adam. It involved monotheism, and it involves basically 7 of the 10 commandments. They had to believe in reward and punishment. You had to also believe in the last day, and you had to believe in the prophets of God. And this is a religion that is required of all mankind. It's required of Jews and non-Jews. Now the second last similarity is the sects and branches. Although they both call for one religion, various sects and branches exist inside of Judaism and Islam. The most popular division in Islam are Sunni, then there's Shia Muslims, and then there's the Kharijites. There are also three traditional types of schools in Islam. There's the schools of jurisprudence, the Sufi orders, and the schools of theology. In Judaism, denominations or branches include different groups which have developed among the Jews from ancient times. The main branches today are Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist. Of course, several other smaller branches exist as well. And the final similarity I got to share in this episode is Muslims are mentioned in the Old Testament. So this final similarity is also derived from studies of Rabbi Ben Abrahamson, and when asked if Islam was mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible, he said yes. In Exodus, when Jethro, aka Shoaib, the father-in-law of Moses, went and made an offering, the offering that he had made was called shlamim. In other words, a perfect or complete offering. And all the followers of Shoaib or Jethro were called Kenites in the Torah, but in the translation of the Torah in Aramaic, they were also called Salamai Muslamim. So we have the word Muslamim there, meaning the children of Jethro, and it meant much more than that, because it actually meant that these were God-fearers, meaning people who had great reverence for God. And these were people who were not part of the children of Israel, but believed in one God and followed the commandments of God, and that's what a Muslim is, one who submits to following God. Number 10, with the dietary laws. Most people have heard the term kosher in reference to Jewish food and the practices of Judaism, and Jews only eat kosher foods, right? At least you're supposed to. And like pork, for example, is not eaten and it's seen as not kosher. Similarly, in Islam, Muslims are also required to only eat certain types of food known as halal foods, and to stay away certain foods. Oftentimes they're called haram foods, although haram does have a broader application, not just when it comes to food. The term kosher means ritually correct, and this is derived from the Torah. Of course, not all Jews strictly follow these dietary guidelines. Most Orthodox Jews, by the way, do keep kosher, whereas many Reform Jews, they may be more loose when it comes to following these rules. In Islam, the Quran does forbid eating things like pork and foods that are classified as either halal, permitted, or haram, forbidden. They have a long list of specifications. For example, alcohol, pork, like I mentioned, blood, improperly slaughtered animals, and a whole lot of other restrictions are applied to foods in Islam. Number 9 brings us multiple daily prayers. This is another big similarity. Anyone may pray as often and at any time as they want. And in both Judaism and Islam, they share the similarity of a set amount of prayers that are to be done in a day. Generally, Muslims have the 5 prayers a day, and that's part of the 5 pillars of Islam. Everybody knows this, even non-Muslims are familiar with the 5 daily prayers. And what they're required to do is to pray in a certain format and face towards Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Now, in Judaism, they usually pray about 3 times a day. Not all branches and sects of Judaism though, but generally they're to pray 3 times a day. One in the morning, and then in the afternoon, and finally one in the evening. Sometimes more prayers, of course, can be added in for specific holidays and things like that. And yeah, certain branches of Judaism consider the daily prayers as optional, like I mentioned. Number 8 brings us Jerusalem being a holy city. According to what's written in the Bible, the capital city now is, according to the Bible, Jerusalem has always had great significance. And now with the state of Israel, of course, Jerusalem is their capital. From Bible times, we know that the city of Jerusalem, which was the old capital of the Jews, that has great significance. It was established by the King David about 3,000 years ago, according to records. Now, David's son, King Solomon, established the first temple there. And even though the temple was never rebuilt after the destruction in 7 AD, Jerusalem is still held in high regard in Judaism. There's places like Temple Mount and the Wailing Wall. They receive thousands of visitors every single year. Now, when it comes to Islam, Jerusalem is also a very holy place. It is Islam's 3rd holiest city after Mecca and Medina, And Muslims recognize the previous prophets throughout history and their connections to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem also actually played a very important role when it came to Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension. That was when the angel Gabriel himself transported Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Jerusalem for prayer, and then for Jerusalem to heaven, where he met some of the previous prophets who had ascended, or at least met their souls. Now, not many people know this, but Jerusalem was also the original direction that Muslims were instructed to face during their prayers. This was then changed to Mecca once Muslims were instructed to do so. Number 7 brings us to the greeting of peace, a very striking thing that these two religions have in common. Peace is a very central aspect to these religions. They both have similar greetings, meaning peace be upon you. Shalom Aleichem. That is a greeting in Hebrew, and that's used in Judaism and amongst Jews. And then the response to that would be Alechem Shalom, meaning unto you peace. Salam Alaikum is the Arabic greeting used by Muslims, of course, and the appropriate response to that would be Wa alaikum salam, meaning same thing as in Hebrew, unto you peace, or peace be unto you as well. Various different ways you can translate that, but yeah, very similar. Head coverings for women comes up next. Both Islam and Judaism encourage modesty in appearance and also promote the idea that women should cover their heads. Amongst Jewish women, you'll notice that when they're married, they often wear a scarf to cover their hair. And Islam, of course, does instruct women to wear a headscarf or hijab after they hit puberty. Along with the head covering, both religions encourage women to dress modestly in general. They don't be encouraging women to be showing off their bits everywhere. This includes, of course, wearing long, loose-fitting clothing, just so that their figure is also covered up. The commonality at number 5 is the calendar. In Judaism and Islam, the calendar is based on the cycles of the moon, and the month begins by the sighting of the moon or calculating when the new moon will be in the sky. The beginning of the year in Judaism is known as Rosh Hashanah, which in Arabic is called Ras Hashanah. Then Yom Kippur corresponds to Ashura for Muslims, and after that we have the famous Jewish holiday Passover, which corresponds with Laylat al-Barat in the month of Shaban. Another example is Serafat HaOmer in Judaism corresponds to Ramadan in Islam. So yeah, that's a huge thing that they have in common, following the moon cycle. So literally the big holidays, they really line up when it comes to Judaism and Islam. Number 4, let's look at the Hadith and Talmud. What are these anyways? Well, in Islam and Judaism, the Hadith and Talmud, they hold a lot of significance because they're used in addition to their scriptures. The Muslims have the Quran, and of course the Jews have the Tanakh, and they were passed down from generation to generation. And again, they're not the scriptures of the religion, but they're supporting texts in how to live out the scriptures. Commonality number 3 is the practice of circumcision. Jews and Muslims, they're known to circumcise their children. They base this off of a teaching that is found in the Jewish scriptures. Abraham was commanded to be circumcised, and that would be a symbol of the promise that God had between Abraham and his offspring. And the Jewish Torah lays out instructions saying that the newborn should be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. And this actually is something that science has said has some benefits. Science has shown that on the 8th day, it's really important to do it on that day because the levels of vitamin K are the highest on that day. And vitamin K plays an important role in stopping bleeding. Now, the command for circumcision is not found in the Quran, but the Prophet Muhammad required it for his male followers, which makes sense because Jews and Muslims, they have very similar histories when it comes to Abraham. And that's actually who we're going to be talking about at number 2. The importance of Abraham is a big commonality. Abraham is a very important figure in Islam and Judaism, and they are both known as Abrahamic religions actually. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are Abrahamic religions. Muslims descend from the Prophet Abraham and his son Ismail, or Ishmael in English. And Abraham had his son Isaac with his wife Sarah, and that's where we get the Jewish nation from. So see that, Father Abraham, start of both the lines of the Jews and the Arabs. And one thing to make note of though is that both Jews and Arabs are classified as Semitic people. Now this is often viewed as only being associated with Jews, but no, anyone that is from the descendant of Shem, the son of Noah, is Semitic. And the commonality at number one we're going to end off at is strict monotheism. Judaism and Islam, they are staunch promoters in monotheism, strict monotheism. God is one, the oneness of God, and they do not shake from that. Muslims refer to God by the term Allah. It's very similar to how Jews refer to God, Eloah. And well as there's other various different names, and I'm not going to get into those, but when they refer to God, the names actually sound the same. Allah, Eloah, very similar. And yes, God doesn't have any sons. God is one. There's no Trinity or anything like that. That is a very big commonality that Jews and Muslims share.